The king's gift was an orc warrior girl, and he couldn't refuse. On a storm-torn night beneath the cliffs of the king's outer keep, a poor human labourer named Draven is returning home with splintered wood on his cart when he hears something heavy crash into the ravine beside the road. He thinks it is a horse thrown from the path or a dead soldier left for scavengers. But when he climbs down through the wet thorns, lightning reveals something far more dangerous. A towering orc warrior girl lies half buried in mud and broken branches, her dark armour cracked, one arm chained with a royal iron clasp and a black feathered arrow buried deep near her ribs. Even wounded, she looks terrifying, broad-shouldered, tusked, fierce, like someone born to command armies, not die in a ditch like prey. Draven knows he should leave her. Humans like him do not survive getting tangled in royal gifts, and they survive even less by helping orcs. But when she tries to rise and collapses into the freezing rain, he moves without thinking. As hoofbeats thunder closer on the road above, he drags her into the dark, just as her hand clamps around his wrist and she whispers, "If they find me with you, they will kill you first." Draven lives where the kingdom forgets to look. His shelter stands beyond the king's hunting road, near a collapsing storage barn and a patch of hard, stony ground that no noble would ever notice twice. It is little more than a shack of repaired planks, patched canvas, and smoke-dark rafters. But it is his. He earns his living doing whatever rough work the estate throws down to men like him, mending wagon wheels, hauling split timber, fixing broken fences, cleaning stalls when the stable boys vanish, and sleeping only when there is no task left to take. He is not important, he is not powerful, he has survived by keeping his head low, his hands busy, and his mouth shut. That is why bringing the orc warrior girl into his shelter feels less like mercy and more like stepping into ruin with open eyes. She's far too large for the narrow cot, so Draven lays her near the hearth on folded blankets and old horsecloths. Rainwater drips from her shattered armour. Mud stains everything she touches. Her breathing is harsh, shallow, wrong. By firelight he sees what the dark hid from him on the roadside. The chain on her wrist is not ordinary iron, but worked steel, marked with the king's seal. Not a prisoner's shackle exactly, something ceremonial, something humiliating, as if she had been wrapped, displayed, and delivered like an object. He should turn her in. Instead, he breaks the arrow shaft, heats water, and cleans the wound with the same steady patience he uses on split leather and broken harness buckles. He is careful, practical, unsentimental. He does not know what kind of poison may have touched the arrowhead, only that fever is already rising beneath her green skin. Her body is built like war-made flesh, powerful shoulders, scarred arms, strength even in stillness. But there is exhaustion in her face too, and something harsher than pain around the eyes. Betrayal. When she wakes, it happens all at once. One moment she is barely conscious. The next she has a knife in hand, his own knife, and Draven is slammed back against the wall hard enough to rattle the planks. Even half-injured, she is stronger than any human he has known. Her tusks flash when she bares her teeth. Her voice is low, rough, commanding. "Who sent you?" Draven's pulse hammers, but he does not beg. "No one." She presses the blade closer, searching his face for weakness, deceit, fear. She finds fear, certainly, but not the kind she expects. Not the cringing fear of a servant before a beast, only the plain fear of a man who knows she could kill him, and still refuses to lie badly. "You're in my home," he says, breathing hard. "If I meant to sell you, I'd have done it already." That gives her pause. Slowly, painfully, she lowers the knife. The movement costs her. Blood seeps fresh through the bandage at her side. She sways, and for one brief second Draven thinks she will fall. Pride keeps her upright. Their first silence is worse than shouting. He offers water. She refuses. He sets it down anyway. She looks around the small shelter with open disdain. The rough tools, the stacked firewood, the patched roof, the plain clay bowl by the hearth, and seems almost offended by the poverty of it. Orc nobility, Draven realizes, must live in a different world entirely. Even wounded, she carries herself like someone used to command, used to being obeyed, used to rooms much larger than this one. "You speak core tongue," Draven says carefully, "better than most soldiers." Her eyes narrow at once. He has noticed too much. "I speak what I must," she replies. It is not an answer. Neither is the false name she gives him a moment later, too short, too convenient, clearly stripped of truth. But it is all she offers, and Draven is wise enough not to push. Outside, dawn begins to pale the cracks in the walls. Then horns sound on the King's Road. Both of them go still. Mounted riders pass somewhere beyond the trees. Voices carry through the wet air. Searchers. Draven sees her reach instinctively for a weapon she no longer has, and for the first time he understands the full size of the danger crouching beside his hearth. This woman is not merely wounded, she is important. And whatever she truly is, whatever game of kings, chains, and blood brought her to his door, one thing is already clear. Their worlds were never meant to meet. The next morning begins with tension. So tight, it seems to live in the air between them. Draven leaves before sunrise to keep suspicion away from his shelter. If he misses his work, people will notice. If people notice, questions will follow. He moves through his chores with the strange feeling that his whole life has tilted overnight. Every wagon wheel he lifts, every fence post he hammers, every bundle of timber he carries feels unreal now, because hidden behind the walls of his poor shelter lies a secret heavy enough to destroy him. When he returns at dusk with stale bread, dried meat, and a handful of herbs bought from an old woman who asks too many questions, he finds the orc warrior girl awake and standing, barely. One hand is braced against the wall. The other grips the table so hard, the wood creaks. Sweat shines on her skin. Her wound has reopened, but pride keeps her on her feet. She turns when he enters, chin lifted, as if she refuses to be seen weak a second time. "You should be lying down," Draven says, "and you should stop speaking to me like I belong here," she answers. But she sits when the pain overtakes her, and he kneels to unwrap the blood-soaked bandage. She tenses at his touch, every muscle ready to strike if he causes pain or insult. Draven says nothing unnecessary. He cleans the wound carefully, checks for heat, crushes bitter herbs into warm water, and binds her side tighter this time. His hands are steady, practiced, gentle, without softness. He handles her like something real and living, not fragile, not monstrous. She watches him the whole time. "You've done this before," she says at last. "On animals, farm hands, once on myself." "I am none of those." Draven ties the bandage and leans back. "No," he says quietly, "you're not." That answer stays with her. Over the next days, survival forces them into a rough pattern. Draven works by day, returns by night, and hides what little food he can spare. He keeps the fire low to avoid smoke. He fixes the cracks in the walls so light cannot betray them. The orc girl, still refusing to tell him who she truly is, regains strength inch by inch. Even injured, she is impossible to ignore. Her presence fills the tiny shelter. When she moves, everything feels smaller around her. Bench, doorway, ceiling, silence. At first, they speak only when necessary. He tells her when to drink. She tells him when the fire is wasting wood. He asks if the pain is worse. She says pain is not worth discussing, but slow changes begin in the spaces between those short exchanges. One night, Draven returns to find his broken axe handle replaced with a stronger binding of leather and cord. She says nothing about it. Another evening, she catches the pot before it slips from the hearth and says almost with contempt, "Your hands are tired." Yet she stays near while he cooks. Once, when riders pass too near the shelter, she moves on instinct to stand between the door and Draven, as though his body has become something she must account for in battle. The first true fracture in her armor comes with fever. The wound burns hot again after she pushes herself too soon. By midnight she is half-conscious, breathing unevenly, speaking in her own language through clenched teeth. Draven cannot understand the words, but grief needs no translation. He hears anger in it, loss, a name spoken again and again like something torn out by force. She thrashes once when the fever peaks, and he catches her shoulders before she can rip the stitches open. For a moment her head falls against his chest, heavy with exhaustion rather than trust. He stays beside her until dawn, cooling her skin with water, forcing small sips between her lips, speaking only to keep her anchored to the room. Not sweet words, not false comfort. Just simple things. You're here. Breathe. Stay awake. Drink. When the fever finally breaks, the sky beyond the cracks in the wall has gone pale. She wakes to find him still sitting there, his back against the bed frame, eyes red with exhaustion. For the first time, she does not reach for a weapon or a wall between them. She only studies him in silence, as if measuring something she does not yet know how to name. Later that day, while he repairs a torn piece of her armor with scavenged iron and boiled leather, she gives a dry, disbelieving laugh. A human wheelwright thinks he can mend orc battle gear. Draven does not look up. Strong things break. 2. The laughter dies from her face. That evening, when he places food beside her, she does something small but startling. She does not wait for him to step away. She eats while he is still there. It is not trust. Not yet. But it is the first. Time she chooses not to treat him like a threat. And just as that fragile change settles between them, a shadow passes by the shuttered window, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots stopping outside Draven's door. The knock does not come. That is what makes it worse. Draven and the orc. Warrior girl both go still as boots stop outside the shelter. Firelight flickers across the walls. The room seems to shrink around them. Draven slowly sets down the leather strap in his hands. She rises in one silent motion despite her healing wound. Taller than him, even slightly bent, one hand already reaching for the knife he left near her bedroll. A man outside mutters to someone farther off. Another answers. Then the boots move. On neither of them breathes properly until the sound disappears into the dark. Only then does Draven realize how close she is standing. If he turned his head, he would be looking directly into her face. Her shoulders are tense, her jaw set hard, and yet she had not moved to flee. She had moved toward the door, toward danger, toward him. "You should have hidden," he says quietly. Her eyes remain fixed on the wall, "and leave you to explain blood, armor, and stolen heat from your fire." He looks at her then, surprised. After a long silence, she adds more roughly, "That would have been dishonorable." It is the first time she has offered him anything that sounds like respect. From that night on, something subtle changes between them. Their routine deepens. Draven no longer leaves her food like an offering to a dangerous animal. They eat in the same room, sometimes in silence, sometimes with short, guarded conversation that slowly grows longer. He teaches her which estate bells mark patrol changes, meal breaks and stable shifts. She teaches him how orcs mark rank through braid knots, scars, and the metalwork worn near the throat. He shows her how to mend harness leather so it bends without splitting. She shows him how to sharpen a blade with patience instead of force. These are small things, but they begin to matter. Their worlds stop feeling like opposites and begin to feel like two harsh languages learning how to touch. One cold evening, rain tapping softly at the roof, Draven asks the question that has been living between them for days. "Why were you chained?" She goes very still. For a moment he thinks she will refuse to answer. Instead, she stares into the fire and says, "Because men who fear strength often prefer to call it a gift when they mean control." The words land heavily in the room. She does not explain more, but the pain in her voice says enough. Whatever happened to her was not simple capture. It was insult, transaction, betrayal dressed in royal ceremony. Later, when Draven turns away to give her privacy as she resets the bandage at her side, she says suddenly, "In my people's halls, a warrior does not owe explanation to one beneath them." Draven nods once. "Then don't explain." That answer unsettles her more than a demand would have, because Draven does not crawl upward toward her status. He does not ask to be favored. He does not try to make her into some fantasy of power. He simply gives her space where no one has. Demanded performance from her, not as warrior, not as trophy, not as political offering. In return, she starts watching him with new attention. She sees how careful he is with every object because he owns so little. How he counts dried beans before dropping them into the pot. How he hides the cracked places in his boots by the way he walks. How he carries tiredness in his shoulders like an old burden he stopped complaining about years ago. She begins to understand that human weakness is not always cowardice. Sometimes it is endurance with no witness. One night, while helping him stack firewood behind the shed, she notices scars across his forearms. Old thin lines, work scars, the kind earned by accidents no one stopped to help with. She reaches for his wrist before thinking. He freezes. Her hand is large around his arm, warm and rough. She studies the marks with a frown. "You were alone." It is not a question. Draven looks away toward the tree line. Mostly. Something unreadable passes through her face. Pity would insult him. She seems to know that. So instead, she says, "You survived." He almost laughs, but there is no humor in it. That is not always the same as living. The words hang between them long after the woodpile is finished. That night she tells him more than she meant. Not her full name, not yet, but enough. She says she was born among high war houses where daughters are raised to command before they are raised to rest. She says she learned early that strength makes others loyal, but usefulness makes them dangerous. She speaks of a dead father whose name still opens doors, and of council fires where men smiled while planning to trade her future like land on a map. She never says she was afraid. Yet every sentence carries the shape of fear sharpened into pride. Draven listens without interruption. He offers no false wisdom, no grand promise, only presence. And because he does not press, she says, one thing more, so quiet he nearly misses it. I was not meant to survive the road. That is the second real suspense beat. Everything sharpens after that. If someone wanted her dead, they may still be searching. If the king's seal was on her chain, then royal hands are involved. If she is of high status among orcs, then whoever finds her first, human court or orc clan, may use Draven as leverage, witness, or disposable proof. The danger outside begins to creep closer. 2 estate workers mention new patrols on the road. A steward complains that the king is furious over a lost delivery. Draven hears it while carrying feed sacks and nearly drops one. Lost delivery. The words make him cold. When he returns home that evening, he finds her standing in the doorway at sunset, her silhouette filling the frame, the wind lifting loose strands of dark hair around her scarred face. For the first time, she looks less like someone hiding and more like someone deciding. "Draven," she says, using his name with deliberate weight. "There is something I have not told you." He stops where he is. Behind her, the sky burns red over the trees like a warning. And in that breathless pause before truth arrives, both of them know that whatever she says next will change the shape of everything between them. She does not speak at once. For a long moment, she stands in the doorway with the dying red light behind her, making her look less like a wounded fugitive and more like something carved from war and fire. Draven sets down the sack in his hands and waits. He has learned by now that forcing words from her only drives them deeper. When she finally turns to face him fully, there is no pride in her expression now, only resolve. "My name," she says, "is not the one I gave you." He says nothing. She steps inside and closes the door behind him, sealing the small shelter into silence. Then, with the same control a warrior might use to pull a blade from her own flesh, she gives him the truth. She is not a common fighter, nor a hired blade, nor a mere daughter of some distant clan chief. She is the only surviving child of one of the most feared orc war houses in the Northern Highlands, a bloodline old enough to command armies, old enough to end feuds, old enough that her hand in marriage or alliance could shift the balance between kingdoms. After her father's death, men on both sides moved quickly. Orc elders wanted to bind her to a political match. Human nobles wanted to parade her strength as proof that even the fiercest orc line could be bent to the crown. The king's gift was never honor. It was a transaction, a display, a threat wrapped in velvet and iron. Draven feels the room change around him as the meaning settles. The chain, the seal, the riders, the arrows on the road. You were being sent to someone, he says. Yes. As what? She holds his gaze then, and for the first time since he found her, her voice loses all armor, as something that was no longer allowed to belong to itself. The words strike harder than any shouted confession could. Draven turns away, not in anger at first, but in shock so deep it feels like distance opening under his feet. For days she has shared his fire, his food, his silence, his hands tending her wounds while carrying a truth too large for his poor shelter to contain. He is only a laborer, a forgotten man mending broken things at the edge of royal land. She is a living treaty, a hunted heir, a woman whose name could bring soldiers to his door before dawn. He looks around the shack suddenly as if seeing it through crueler eyes. The patched walls, the low roof, the narrow cot, the cracked bowl by the fire. Everything about his life feels too small, too humble, too human for what has been sitting beside his hearth. "You should have told me," he says. Her face tightens. "Would you have helped me if I had?" The silence that follows is answer. Enough, that hurts her more than he expects. Outside, hoofbeats shatter the moment, not one rider, many. Draven crosses to the shutter and peers through the crack. Torchlight moves through the trees below like fire, threading through black cloth. Armed men, not estate workers this time. Too many, too organized, and among them, worse, banners he does not recognize, marked with the heavy hooked symbol of an orc war clan. "Human riders from the king, orc warriors from her people. Both have found the trail. The danger crashes into the shelter all at once. She reaches for her repaired armor. Draven steps back from her instinctively, and that single movement wounds more, deeply than any blade. For the first time, she sees in his face not fear of her strength, but fear of her world, of what she brings with her, of what being near her now costs. "They will tear this place apart," he says. "Yes. They'll kill me if the king's men think I helped you. Yes. And your people." At that, her jaw hardens. "My people will ask whether I ordered you to hide me, whether you touched what was not yours, whether a human man presumed." Closeness he was never given. The cruelty of rank, custom, and rumor lands between them like another weapon. Draven stares at her, hollowed by the sudden understanding that even after everything, after the fever, the firelight, the nights of quiet trust, he may still be nothing in her world, but a risk to be judged. Then comes the emotional blow. She fastens her bracer with shaking fingers and says, voice low and bitter, "I told you from the beginning, if they found me with you, they would kill you first." A fist pounds against the outer door, once, then again louder. Voices rise outside in two languages. Draven and the orc warrior woman stand in the center of the small shelter, the fragile world they built around fire, pain, and unspoken tenderness. Breaking under the weight of who she truly is, and when she turns toward the door, ready to face soldiers, clan, king, and judgment alone, Draven does not follow her. That is where the break opens. For one terrible heartbeat, neither of them moves. The pounding on the door grows louder, joined now by shouted commands outside. Human voices demanding entry, orc voices calling in their own harsh tongue, each side warning the other back from the threshold. Torchlight slashes through the cracks. In the walls, the whole shelter seems to tremble beneath the weight of what is waiting beyond it. The orc warrior woman reaches for the latch. Draven catches her wrist. It is the first time he stops her, not to bind a wound or steady her through fever, but to keep her from walking out of his life. She looks down at his hand around her arm, then up at his face. There is no fear in him now. Fear is still there, yes, but something else has finally risen above it. "If you open that door like this," he says, voice tight but steady, "they won't see you as a woman who survived betrayal. They'll see a prize they found again." A flicker passes through her eyes. Pain, recognition, rage. Another blow shakes the wood. "Then what would you have me do?" she asks. "Hide behind you while kings and war chiefs decide whether to chain me once more?" "No." His grip tightens once, then softens. "I'm saying don't go out as what they made you." That lands. For a breath, the noise outside seems to fall away. She studies him as if seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a poor human who stumbled into her path, but as the one man who looked at her ruin and still saw a person beneath it. Then voices rise outside again. Someone is ordering the doctor broken. Someone else is shouting that she must be taken alive. The moment for hesitation dies. She turns from the door and crosses the room in 2 long strides to the place where Draven had stacked the pieces of her armor. Not the ceremonial chain, not the broken signs of delivery, the repaired armor, the leather he reinforced, the iron he reshaped with working hands, the pieces touched by care, not ownership. She lifts the chest piece and fastens it. Draven moves automatically to help secure the side straps, where her wound still limits her reach. Their hands brush. Once, neither pulls away. When she speaks, her voice is low, grave, and utterly different from before. "My true name is Kerza of the House of Voruk." The name fills the room, like a bell struck in darkness. She does not say it with arrogance. She says it like an oath. Draven stills. Even without knowing the full politics of the North, he hears the weight in it. "I am Warborn," she continues, "daughter of a house that has buried kings, broken clans, and stood unbent before crowns older than your kingdom. Since childhood I was taught that my life would never belong to me. Only the blood, duty and bargain." Outside, wood splinters near the hinge, but Kerza does not hurry now. The truth once spoken gives her a terrible calm. "I was sent south in chains because men at home feared what I would refuse," she says, "and men here desired what I would not give. My body, my name, my strength, my future, all to seal peace, flatter pride, and feed the vanity of those who call it order." Her gaze locks onto his. "Then I fell into a ditch like carrion, and a human man with nothing gave me the one thing no hall of power ever did." Draven's throat tightens. She steps closer. A choice. The word breaks something open between them. For the first time, she is not speaking like warrior to witness, noble to commoner, or fugitive to shelterer. She is speaking like a woman standing at the edge of the life she was assigned, offering the truth of herself to the only person who ever asked nothing from it. Then comes the major offer. "When this door opens," Kerza says, "I can end this in the way my blood expects. I can walk out, name myself, and let both sides drag me back into their bargain. I can save your life that way. They will call you a frightened peasant, a fool, a nobody who knew nothing." Draven says nothing. He already knows there is more. Her jaw tightens. This next part costs her more than battle ever could. "Or," she says, voice lower now, "I can make another claim." Outside, the latch groans. A blade pushes through the gap. Kerza does not look away from him. "In my people's law, a war-born daughter may still choose one bond before witnesses if her freedom has been taken unlawfully. Not marriage, as your courts would name it, not ownership, a binding of equal standing. a public claim that says, "This life is not a gift, not a treaty, not a spoil of kings. It is mine to join where I will." She draws one breath. "If I speak that claim with your name, neither the king nor my clan can take me without first spilling blood enough to start open war." Now Draven understands the full weight of what she is offering. Not safety, not gratitude. A place beside her in the center of a storm. He stares at her, almost unable to breathe. "You would do that?" Kerza's expression is fierce and unbearably vulnerable at once. "Do not mistake me. I am not asking from softness." Then, after a beat, more quietly, "I am asking because when I was powerless, you did not kneel to my rank, fear my strength, or use my need. You saw me when I had nothing left that the world respects, and I—" She swallows once. "I have come to value the way you remain gentle without becoming weak." The words hit deeper than praise. They strike directly at the wound Draven has carried all his life, that he is too small for great things, too poor for choice, too ordinary to matter where power gathers. But still he hesitates, not because he doubts her, because he doubts himself. "If you say my name out there," he says, "they will laugh first, then they will try to kill me. Yes, I'm human, poor, no title, no land worth speaking of. Yes, your people would hate me. Some would. Your enemies would use me against you. They will try." He laughs then, once without humor, and drags a hand over his face. "And you still ask?" Kerza steps so close that the firelight catches in the gold-brown depths of her eyes. "I ask because I would rather stand beside a man who earned my trust in hunger, blood, and silence than bend knee to every throne that thinks it owns me." Her voice drops to almost a whisper. "But I will not chain you with the same cruelty they used on me. If you say no, I walk out alone." That is the choice, not romance spoken too early, not fantasy without cost. A real choice sharpened by class, danger, custom, and belonging. Outside, the door begins to crack inward. Draven looks at the poor shelter around them, patched roof, rough table, dying fire, blankets on the floor. The whole fragile world where he first saw her bleeding and furious and alive. Then he looks at Kerza, who entered this place as the king's gift, and became instead the one truth that made his small life feel suddenly, painfully awake. He thinks of everything waiting on the other side of yes. War clans, royal vengeance, ridicule, blood, exile, a future too large for any man like him to imagine. He thinks of what waits on the other side of no, survival, perhaps, but the old empty life restored like a room after a fire, standing but changed forever by what it lost. Then the door splits, men surge against it. And Draven makes his choice. He takes her hand, not like a servant receiving command, not like a man grasping at power, like an equal stepping into danger with open eyes. "Then speak it," he says. The words are barely out before the door crashes inward and torchlight floods the room. Human steel orc blades, shouted orders, drawn bows. But Kerza does not step back. Her fingers lock around Draven's with crushing certainty as she strides forward into the broken doorway. When she names herself, the room falls silent. When she names him beside her, silence becomes shock. And when she declares before king's men and clan warriors alike that she was not given, not taken, and will not be bargained, that if any hand reaches for him, it reaches through her first, the night changes shape around them. Because love is not what is spoken here, not yet. What is spoken is harder. Choice, claim, defiance, and the cost of it begins immediately. For a moment after Kerza speaks, no one moves. The broken doorway stands open to the night, torchlight burning in the wet air, blades half raised, every face caught between disbelief and fury. Human soldiers stare as if they have just witnessed madness. The orc warriors look worse, not shocked but insulted. To them, this is not simply rebellion. It is a public wound to pride, custom, and control. Draven feels every eye land on him at once. He has never been looked at this way in his life, not as a man, not even as a threat, more like an error in the world. A poor human labourer standing beside a war-born orc daughter, hand in hand, while she names him before kings and clans as her chosen equal. The first voice to break the silence is human. A captain of the king's riders steps forward and calls Kaerza's claim invalid, saying she was royal property the moment she crossed into Crown lands under seal. The words are hardly out before one of the orc warriors snarls and takes offence at the insult, because even those who would drag her home do not tolerate hearing a daughter of House Voruk called property by a human mouth. Old hatred flares, steel shifts, men begin reaching for war. That is when Kaerza does what none of them expect. She steps in front of Draven, not behind him, not clinging to him, but before him, like a commander entering a battlefield she has already chosen. Then she tears the last of the royal chain from her wrist and throws it into the mud. The sound of it landing is small, but it changes everything. In that one gesture, she rejects the king's claim without asking permission, in front of human soldiers, in front of her own clan, in front of witnesses who will carry the shame of that image farther than any messenger could carry a letter. The captain reaches for her. He never touches her. The first orc blade moves. A human sword answers. Chaos erupts. What follows is not a grand battle meant to glorify blood. It is fast, ugly, and costly. Draven is dragged into it, not because he is a hero from legend, but because he refuses to leave when staying matters. He pulls Kaerza's wounded side out of a spear's path. He takes a blow meant for her shoulder with a timber hook from his own shed. He uses the room he knows, the narrow walls, the hanging tools, the low beams, to turn stronger men clumsy. He fights like a labourer, protecting the only thing in his life he cannot bear to lose. Kaerza fights like a storm finally given a direction. Side by side, they are not graceful, they are not perfect, but they are real. Every movement between them is built from the same things that built their bond. Instinct, trust, care, and the memory of surviving together in a space too small for lies. The clash ends only when a senior orc commander arrives and recognizes what will happen if blood spills any further. If the king's men kill Kaerza after her public claim, the northern clans will call it murder and answer with war. If the clans drag her away by force after witnesses heard her choice, they will split themselves trying to justify it. She has cornered both powers with the one thing neither side believed she would use: her own will. So the outside conflict does not end in triumph. It ends in retreat, rage, and consequence. The human captain leaves with a threat from the crown. The orc commander leaves with a warning that House Voruk will not forget what has been done here. Neither side accepts defeat, but neither side dares strike again that night. And by dawn, Draven and Kaerza are gone. They do not remain by the king's road, waiting for mercy from people who have none to spare. They leave the broken shed behind, with only what can be carried: tools, dried food, spare cloth, her repaired armor, his work knives, and the quiet knowledge that there is no going back. That is what their love costs first. It costs Draven the only home he ever had, poor as it was. It costs Kaerza the last easy path back into her old life. It costs them safety, anonymity, and the comfort of belonging unquestioned to the worlds that shaped them. The journey that follows is hard. There is no sudden crown, no miracle acceptance, no soft reward waiting just beyond the trees. They travel north through disputed land, sometimes welcomed by no one. Human inns shut doors at the sight of her. Orc camps mock Draven before they learn to fear the steadiness in him. Some who meet them call their bond unnatural. Others call it politics. Almost no one understands it for what it truly is. But slowly, the change begins. Not in the kingdoms first. In them. Draven is no longer the forgotten man bending his back for scraps in a place that never spoke his name with care. He still works with his hands, he still fixes what is broken, but now the skill that once kept him invisible becomes the thing that earns him place. He repairs wagons, armor, roof beams, bridges and tools in border settlements where human and orc traders uneasily cross paths. People begin to know him not as a mistake in Kerser's shadow, but as the man who can build, mend and endure without humiliation twisting him bitter. Kerser changes too, though more painfully. She does not return to House Voruk as a daughter, to be managed. When she finally stands before her people again, it is not in chains, not as a gift, and not as a bargaining piece. She returns marked by choice, scandal, and survival. Some despise her for it, some admire her in secret. A few, especially those long crushed under tradition, begin to look at her differently, not merely as a war-born heir, but as someone who shattered the path laid down for her and lived. She pays for that defiance. She loses old allies. She loses the ease of unquestioned rank. She loses the illusion that strength alone can protect what matters. But in losing those things, she gains something her world never meant to give her, a life shaped by consent instead of duty. Their love costs them both the stories others had written for them. That is why it becomes real. Seasons pass. The king never forgives the insult, but his court grows cautious. Open war never comes. The risk is too great. The alliance is too fragile. The road between human land and the northern clans remains tense, but trade changes slowly, then language, then custom, in tiny, stubborn ways. Not because the world turns kind, but because once one impossible thing survives in plain sight, other impossibilities begin to breathe. In time, Draven and Kerser build a new home far from the king's estate and far from the deepest halls of her birth. A strong house on the border hills, where stone meets pine and both human carts and orc riders sometimes stop. It is larger than his old shelter, but not grand, built by his hands, reinforced by hers, a place with room enough for firelight, tools, honored steel, and silence that is no longer lonely. And in that house, one thing remains above the hearth. Not a crown, not a banner, a broken piece of royal chain. Draven keeps it there blackened and bent, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what she was made into, of what she refused, of the night a king tried to send a gift and instead lost all claim to it. Years later, on the first storm-heavy night of autumn, rain drums against the roof, just as it did when he first found her. Draven steps to the doorway and looks out over the dark hillside. Behind him, Kerser is laughing softly at something only half finished in the room, a leather strap, a stubborn hinge, some ordinary small thing between them that would have once seemed too humble for a war-born daughter and too precious for a poor human to imagine sharing. He turns. She stands in the firelight, taller than him, scarred, strong, and no longer carrying any chain. For a moment, the years fall away, and he sees her again as she was that first night, mud-streaked, furious, half lost between life and death. Only now she is home. Draven crosses the room and places one hand over hers. Above them, the broken chain glints in the warm light. Outside, the storm passes. Inside, the king's gift is no longer a gift at all, but a woman who was finally allowed to choose, and the man who chose her back.